back, folks. Sorry about the wait. We had to change the location for one of Nina's field abilities to be used. But anyway, we're back to doing Breath of Fire 2 guide for Nina, who's our go-to black mage in this game, along with Blue. So anyway, today we're going to be covering Nina's strengths, weaknesses, field and combat abilities, fusion forms and abilities, and spells, and of course, final end game equipment for Nina to use in general. So we're going to go ahead and get started. So Nina's very different from all the Ninas from the past and later Breath of Fire games, because this Nina right here is the only one that can use attack spells. So Breath of Fire 2's Nina is way looks different than the one from the first game and all the others that come after her. Now, since I never played Breath of Fire 3, 4, and 5, I can't really tell whether or not Nina uses attack spells in those games, so I can't be be for sure as I know. My apologies there. Let's go ahead and go over what we do know about her stats and everything. So, being your standard black mage, Nina is very high wisdom, which works very nicely in our favor, because wisdom in this game calculates chances for critical damage with your attack spells. But sadly, for a large amount of the party members, that stat doesn't really accumulate to being useful in general. Or at least this is what I've learned in general. So as you can definitely tell, her strong areas are wisdom, luck, and agility. And her physical combat and defense are not her highest priority, unfortunately. But then again, that's not the real reason you use Nina. You use Nina mostly to bombard enemies with spells. Her combat ability will allow her to regain any AP she's used. Of course, sometimes it'll work and sometimes it will not. And she's actually got a very strong fusion form that we'll showcase a little bit later. That allows her to not only get rid of enemies without having to engage them, but also augment her AP as well as her spellcasting capabilities as well. So anyway, we're going to go ahead and cover her field and combat abilities right now. Nina gets access to 2 field abilities. We'll be going over the Great Bird ability once we get out of here. So anyway, oops. Oh, weird. Thought I set it up to include Nina. Well, anyway, this place can work well. My apologies. I thought I had Nina at the lead, but I guess I did not. Anyway, so Nina has a field ability that only works with areas with pitfall, traps, or gaps that your party will fall through. This will allow Nina to transport herself and the rest of the party back up to the floor that you fell off of. This really doesn't have a whole lot of usability, but this would be very useful in this area because there would have been holes that would appear for opening up the chest in Numenfuss Tower, which is right here, by the way. That ability, unfortunately, does not have very good use overall, but it's good for certain areas. So I'm going to have Nina cast a spell right here, and then hopefully on the next battle we'll be able to use her Will command. Will is pretty much the opposite of Ryu's Guts ability, and instead of healing HP, this will allow you to restore AP based on how much AP that Nina has pretty much used. Now the downside is that it will not always work, because if you do this with full AP, she will not get any AP at all when performing well. But if you use a spell on one of the attacks and then perform Will, she'll get almost roughly whatever you basically used it for. So I'm going to cast Bold X, which requires 30, and then we'll get into another battle that will showcase Will again. So basically, Nina can basically refill her AP on her own, but the amount she gets back varies depending on how much AP she's basically lost, pretty much. it's somewhat decent, but technically I don't really use Nina's spells a whole lot, which is kind of regrettable. But since I want to save that for boss fights, as you can definitely tell, even though I used spells in the previous combat, I didn't get one bit of AP back on that last one. Yeah, it's just finicky with Will because Will only really works when you use it on the same combat pretty much overall. So if I was to cast Bolt Axe and the enemy survives and I use Will again, she would have gotten her AP back. But obviously you can't just restore it in battle. It might be just a little bit too much for her to get back, obviously. But unfortunately, I don't know much about the command itself. But those that do, feel free to hit the comments to describe it. So anyway, Nina also has a second combat field ability that she gets access to once the Great Bird has been revived. But I'm at the point of this game where the Great Bird's being chased by the demons that escape from Gate. So we cannot summon the Great Bird. But in between the time you do get the Great Bird from Windia to the dragon being weakened by the bombs and releasing the demons, you can use the Great Bird to fly over the known gameplay world to get to your destinations pretty quickly. It's the only way to get to Evrai. One thing to keep in mind, though, is that you'll want to get the Empire Sword, and if you want to fish that Mirion between Kotlin and Bando for Medusa Shields, you'll probably want to do that before you go to Gate to trigger the scenes leading to the traveling to Infinity. So anyway, that completes our coverage of Nina's field and combat abilities. So we're going to go ahead and cover her spells. We do not have Fireball, Bomb, and Missile yet, but we will cover those still. So anyway, unlike Blue, Nina gets access to pretty much nearly all of the attack spells, but she doesn't get any buff spells, unlike Blue. Well, thank you for the lurk, Ship Roman. Anyway, so we're going to be covering the spells. The first four that she does get automatically is Tornado, Thunder, and Cold. All of them deal pretty much roughly anywhere between 30 to 35 damage for the most part. Tornado's unique is that unlike the other three spells, wind damage in this game is kind of not calculated. So they kind of screwed that up along with this and Typhoon. These are also spells that are exclusive to Nina, by the way. So she cannot deal full damage with these spells, even if the enemy's weak against wind. Now, of course, with Thunder, Cold, and Spark, you'll be able to do less damage if they're strong against those elements, and deal more damage when they're susceptible to those elements. Thunder, of course, allows you to attack all enemies, by the way, so this is actually a pretty good early on group attack spell that you can get access to, but eventually will get replaced by S-Boom once you get access to it. Agility Down is a debuff spell that allows Nina to try to weaken an enemy's agility, make it a little bit more slower for the party to attack their enemies. Most debuffs do not really connect for the most part, so they will not always work against these enemies, unfortunately. So, unfortunately, it has very few applications to use. Power Down also faces the same issue. This lowers the enemy's strength for the entire combat up until the end of the battle. Like I said before, this does not always click with all enemies, but it does work against certain enemies. Exit allows Nina to teleport the party out of dungeons and back to the world map. One thing to keep in mind, though, is that exit will not always work at all dungeons. Numafus Towers being one of the examples, as well as Bando. So you will not be able to use exit in those dungeons that won't let you do that. S-Boom is her second tier lightning spell that she gets. This spell deals anywhere between 55 to 60 damage for the most part, or it deals more higher depending on formation wise. This is a very high damaging lightning spell for the most part, and deals pretty good damage against any aquatic enemies that are susceptible to lightning. You'll probably want to use that until you get access to Bolt Axe. Defense Down is the last debuff spell that Nina gets access to. This will help you lower enemies' defenses in combat for its entirety until the enemy is defeated. Downside is, like I said before, debuffs don't always work very well in this game, but this spell does have a few usages. It can be used against atomic sludges on John and Isle, and this can be very useful for your physical attackers to deal more damage if it connects. Drain allows Nina to siphon any AP off of an opponent to refill her own. This spell will not always drain AP, unfortunately. It will work against certain enemies, but not all of them. But it's there in case you do need to refill Nina's AP if you need to. Flame is the second tier fire spell that Nina gets. This will replace Spark as you go to. Not to mention, this will attack all enemies on screen. This spell deals anywhere between 65 to 70 damage for the most part. Deals more if the enemy's weak against fire, and deals less against enemies that are strong against fire. Typhoon, of course, does the same amount of damage as Flame and S-Boom, but the problem is this spell doesn't really inflict elemental damage like it should be doing. So unfortunately, this kind of ruins any usage, obviously. Freeze, of course, is probably the second highest ice spell tier that Nina gets access to. Not to mention, this will replace Cold as your go-to ice spell. This spell can pretty much deal anywhere between 95 to 110 damage, if I'm not mistaken, but it's pretty much around 100 damage for the most part. So if enemies are weak against Freeze, they'll take more damage. And any enemies that are strong against ice, they'll take less damage. Angel is an instant death spell for undead enemies. This spell will not work against spirit enemies, by the way. But this spell won't always land, but when it does, it'll instantly defeat any undead enemies that you might come across. Death, of course, allows Nina to instantly instantly defeat an enemy with the spell. When it gets successfully applied, it will wipe out any of the enemy's remaining HP. This will not work against undead enemies, non-living enemies like machines, or organic enemy-based enemies like golems. So just be forewarned that this spell is only really useful against certain mostly living enemies, but there are certain living enemies that are immune to the death spell. So just be forewarned when using it. Hail, of course, is Nina's ultimate ice spell. This allows her to attack all enemies, and if she scores crit with this spell, Ice Puppies will follow after the wolf to attack the enemies and deal crit damage. But anyway, this spell deals anywhere between 110 to 115 for the most part. And deals more against enemies that are susceptible to ice, and deals less when enemies are strong against ice. Bold X, of course, allows Nina to deal anywhere between 150 to 160 damage on all enemies on screen. This spell will deal more damage if they're weak against lightning, and deals less if they're strong against it. This is actually a very good spell to get used if you're hunting down Zodiacs. Those things are actually weak against lightning. At level 52, Nina will learn Fireball, her ultimate fire spell. This spell will deal anywhere between 110 to 115 damage or so, right around that range. Deals more when the enemy is actually susceptible to fire, and deals less when they're strong against it. Bomb, which will be learned at 56, is very odd for a beginner spell to be obtained this late. It allows her to deal anywhere between 35 to 40 so damage, right around that range. But anyway, unlike Tornado and Typhoon, Bomb and Missile can be actually inflict wind-based damage on those foes. So if you know any enemies that are susceptible to wind, just use Bomb and Missile instead. Missile is Nina's final spell that she gets. This one deals anywhere between 105 to 110 damage, and deals more if the enemy is actually susceptible to wind, and deals less if any enemies are actually strong against it. Alright, so now that we've gone over her spells, let's go ahead and warp back to Township, so we can save the trip there. So while that's going on, I'm going to give me some water. Oh, that was quick. So anyway, Nina does have two fusions. One is based on her affinity to win. The other, of course, is her best one that she gets access to. So anyway, we're going to go ahead and do the fusing right now. So Nina gets access to two forms. So she gets access to Spoo, which doesn't alter her appearance other than her sprite appearance on game. She does get a little bit of a stat increase. In turn, she does get her offense and defense increased a bit, and her agility also goes up as well. Her wisdom also picks up as well in turn as well. So this doesn't really affect anything other than her stats for the most part. So anyway, we're going to go ahead and cover Nina's fusion form, which requires Spoo and Seni. So she gets the gets this angel form, which she uses, and she gets an exclusive combat ability called Banish. So we're gonna go out into outside township and go into battle. So once we get into battle, I'll describe how Banish works. But before we do that, let's go ahead and check Nina's stats here. As you can definitely tell, her offense and defense have improved significantly. Her vigor also improves as well, but not as fast as it was when she had only Spoo. And her wisdom will be maxed out when applied to this form in turn. And she also gets more additional AP in this form too. So that gives her a walloping 463 in general. So anyway, we're going to get into battle so we can showcase Banish and be on our way. So Banish allows Nina to use her powers to remove all the enemies from the battlefield. This will automatically end the battle when it's successfully applied, but this will not always work with all enemies. Sometimes it'll banish one enemy and sometimes leave the others intact, or just won't work on them at all. So this is actually very good in terms of speedrun sense. If you want to try to get through some of the dungeons without having to encounter the enemies. And this can be very useful for those that don't train their party members up to date and don't want to deal with all the stronger monsters. So we're going to go ahead and use this to cancel the fusion. So Nina will be back to where she was before her fusions. Alright, so let's go over Nina's best gear to bring if you do decide to bring her into the final battles. Immortal Ring is arguably Nina's best weapon, but it's also the same best weapon for Blue. So I always give this to Nina since Blue is more of a secret character and less of a permanent party member for the most part. But if you do decide to give Blue the Immortal Ring, the Ember Ring can also work to Nina's favor. Wrath Ring is actually the third strongest ring in the entire game. You can either win that from Homos on the first part of Infinity, or you can try to fish it on one of the islands near Evrai. And that Miron sells not only that ring, but the Slicer Dagger, which is also Sten's second best dagger in the entire game outside the Demon Dagger. Nose Robe is arguably Nina's best ultimate armor, but it's also shared by other party members like Spar, Cat, and Blue. So this actually puts Nina into huge competition if you want to put this armor on one of the other characters. The Mother Robe can also be used instead if you don't want to give Nina the Noise Robe, but she has a large amount of contenders for this armor in general. Holy Shield and Sun Mask, which can be bought at Beretta's store or Night Rider Island Armory. Those are her best gear. Holy Shield in particular will allow Nina to negate spell damage at certain times. Very reliable stuff for her to have. I went ahead and gave Nina a Wise Hoop. Normally Wisdom would not work for many of the characters since they don't crit with any of the spells they do get. But Nina can definitely make full use of her Wisdom since she has a lot of attack spells. And this is actually a very good accessory for her. If you do not want to give her Wise Hoop, you can also give her Iron Bracelet to bolster her defenses. Wind Bracelet, which you can get during the Trial of the Great Bird. This will improve her agility. As you can definitely hear, it gives her a plus 10 on that. I think she's the only one that can equip this, by the way, but I could be wrong. And you can also give her the Dream Bracelet, which allows her to negate spell damage. She's one of the few party members that can actually equip the Skull Bracelet. And from what I hear, that could also be useful for Nino and Blue as well. So anyway, that officially covers Nina's guide. I hope everyone got some use out of that. Our final guide for the day will be Spar. And when we get back, we'll be at a more suitable area to showcase his abilities. And I'm going to take a break and get some water and switch back. Yikes. Well, we already did the guide, so that doesn't matter. So I'll be right back. So hang tight. I'll be right back.